the companies that do speak the language of educators will prevail better than I think maybe some of these solver tools. I actually think the more exciting applications of AI in education are actually invisible ways of embedding AI, when you embed AI in ways that already exist in their workflows and people might not even know that they're engaging with AI. With every massive generational, tech disruption, I don't think the incumbents will win this all. I do think there's a lot of opportunity for disruption. And I think, as we know, a broader trend around innovators dilemma, I think things will change.
Hey, you found Ways We Learn, an investigation of how learning happens across all ages and modalities. Let's go learn something. Hi, and welcome back to Ways We Learn. I'm Sean, and I'm here with Joe and Brian. And it seems like everyone's talking about AI these days, but it's not that often that you get to speak with someone who can really pull back the curtain on how the future of AI is taking shape. But that's why you listen to Ways We Learn, isn't it? Claire Zau is a vice president at GSV Ventures, which is an early-stage EdTech venture capital firm at the forefront of transformative technologies that are shaping the future of education and work. Some of their notable early investments are Coursera, Classdojo, Degreed, Guild Education, and many more that you would recognize if you're in the education space. So they're getting in early with some really powerful, important education companies. Claire spends a lot of her time at the intersection of AI and education startups and writes a weekly newsletter on Substack that you should definitely check out. It's called AIeducation.substack.com. We'll link that in the episode notes. And Claire has a BA from Stanford and a Master's of Education from UPenn's Graduate School of Education. And we are really lucky to get to learn from her today. So Claire, thank you for joining Ways We Learn, and welcome.
Yeah, thank you all for having me. I am so excited. I know this has been long awaited, and I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to chat with you all on all things AI. It's one of my favorite subjects, and so excited to also hear from you all on how you're thinking about it.
Yeah, no, we're looking forward to this. So let's just start with a little bit more of your background. Is there anything else that we should know about you and where you've come from?
Yeah, grew up all over Asia, actually originally from Hong Kong, but as you can see from my background, I'm actually dialing in from New York. Have kind of jumped around different cities, but currently based out of New York. And yeah, have always been very interested in this intersection of education, business, and innovation, and really finding solutions out there. And I think we're really at one of these, major value creation opportunities of our time. And that's kind of why I've always wanted to jump on all things AI. I think we'll see some of the biggest disruptions to incumbents and coolest companies become created in these next few years. So really excited about what that means for education, what that means for the broader tech sector, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited to have you on. Also, anybody who's listening, her newsletter is like the only thing I read now to stay up to date. Like, I know everything that's happening.
Really
it fills my
really
entire
good.
reading list. It's amazing. So it's a great resource. So basically, every time I talk to somebody in the venture industry, I always think of you guys as like the tallest trees in the forest, right? You're seeing everything that's kind of happening in the market. There's been hundreds of EdTech AI companies that have been launched, some of them exceptionally well funded. All the spaghetti's been thrown at the wall. What kind of tools are you seeing stick? What's actually like making an impact right now?
Yeah, for sure. I think, we've been investing, in AI for a long time now. And I think, as most of you all in the broader EdTech builder space have known, is, AI is not new. Older iterations of deterministic types of AI have been around, and older forms of machine learning have been around for a while, and we've seen that implemented. But, and because of that, we've invested in older AI companies like Photomath, Turnitin, Gradescope, and so have been familiar with the space for a while. But I do think that, the launch of ChatGPT was kind of that big moment for consumer adoption that really showed that the power of this tech. It's actually crazy how fast it was adopted, faster than TikTok, Pinterest, fastest application to reach 100 million users. So for us, we really saw that as a signal for what was to come in the education space, especially as it relates to not only enterprise applications and workforce, but also how this could completely transform the education space. I think what we ended up seeing in just the broader startup landscape was a ton of awesome building activity, which we love. I think people building what many people call like wrapper applications, a ton of cool weekend projects. But I also think there was a lot of now an emergence of companies that have maybe sat in the previous form of traditional AI or non-AI companies building AI applications and embedding that technology into their existing solutions. And so I do think there was this kind of mad scramble where a lot of companies are like, we're AI now, please give us funding. But I think there's a deeper question of what exactly is your AI doing? Is it a weekend project, or is this really undergirding a existing business or an existing idea that would actually achieve great business scale and education outcomes, regardless of whether or not you had AI? So we've seen a ton of great companies emerge in space. For us, we've invested in about 6 or 7 AI EdTech companies in the last couple of months. Really exciting, everything across very early stage seed bets, really based off of great founders that are coming off of traditionally big tech companies that are now looking to use the technology, as well as some later stage businesses like Speak, we just invested in, which is a language learning company that raised Series B. So yeah, very excited and continue to be very excited about all the startup activity in the space.
What parts would you say are pretty saturated right now? Like, I imagine there's you've seen a lot of math tutors, AI math tutors. Like, what else are you seeing? Like, hey guys, like, we have enough of these right now.
Yeah. So internally at GSV, we've run this exercise of mapping out every AI company
Yep.
we've spoken with, and we're teasing out building kind of a living landscape of all the activity in the space. And it's crazy because I think there's actually, when you speak to people outside of the education space, they're like, how many AI education companies could there possibly be? Please list me 3. And there's actually about 250 that we've met, at least, or so. And so lots of activity in the space. I think we're seeing a lot in kind of the very obvious value capture opportunities. So a lot in productivity. I think that's actually what we saw in the first wave of ChatGPT being launched. You had kind of that story of, Jasper AI raising a massive round to kind of build a marketing version or a marketing suite of tools built on top of generative AI, which was great. And we kind of saw the education version of that. A lot of writing applications, a lot of help me write my emails, help me become 10 times more productive type applications. I think that went a little downstream into individual vertical professions. So I want to say there are about 30 or so companies all targeting teacher productivity. So really kind of tackling the high amount of admin and cognitive admin work that teachers do that take away from time teaching. And so a lot of applications focus on that. I would say there's a lot of applications also focus on building the second brain, and that kind of spans across both K-12 and workforce. This idea that you can now have an AI that helps you connect all the disparate sources and dots that you have and all the material that you're seeing, whether that's screenshots, emails, all of that. So a lot of those solutions. And then I think many AI tutors. So I think the amount of pitches of people who say that they are tackling Bloom's 2 Sigma problem and building everyone's going to get a one-to-one personalized tutor. And I think we're very excited about that vision, but I don't think we're seeing enough differentiation on how people are actually going to achieve that vision.
So nobody's taking a unique approach to the AI tutor yet that you've seen?
I would say people are definitely taking differentiated approaches, but we're seeing a lot of, I think, in 2 buckets. You've got a lot of platforms that are leveraging, especially now, actually multimodal AI or layering different models on top of each other so that you can create these AI solvers. Yeah. So kind of like and in many ways, ChatGPT can do this now, but when they've been rolling out these products where you can take a photo of your homework or an assignment and an AI can walk you through those questions, seeing a lot of traction in the student space. So kind of think of that as like the AI supercharged version of Chegg. So homework solvers, study solvers. And then I think the other part is maybe those that have a little bit of more like learning guardrails in mind. So I think Conmigo is the one that comes to mind, but a lot selling to schools, selling to districts, saying that we can now allow you to scale your best teachers so that your teachers can focus on teaching and then students can still have access to a one-to-one version of that same teacher. So a lot of different interesting applications. But I would say one thing I have been seeing that maybe it is an interesting trend is that everybody has kind of automatically taken the same skeuomorphic approach as ChatGPT and really built products that are chatbot facing, when I don't know if that's the best format for engaging with AIs. But I think it's just interesting to see that kind of that extension to to think that chatbots are the best way to engage with AI tutors when there are potentially many other ways to use this multimodality AI.
That's one of the most frustrating things I've seen with a lot of ChatGPT things is they're conflating an interface chatbot, which could be AI and could be kind of like the old school thing you do when you need to change your flight on United or whatever. Right. With the idea of generative AI. And they're actually separate concepts that those always get so kind of overlapped.
Yeah. And I actually think exactly what you're saying. Like, I actually think the more exciting applications of AI in education are actually invisible ways of embedding AI. I think we've seen basically every company from Chegg to even Khan Academy to Quizlet and many others basically be like, we're AI now, and we've rolled out a chatbot that you can chat with. But I don't think that is going to lead to better learning, better outcomes, more productivity. I do think where you're going to see more gains is when you embed AI in ways that already exist in their workflows, and people might not even know that they're engaging with AI.
Have you seen any responses from either schools or teachers or someone about that kind of split of we'll just take a picture of your homework and we'll give you the answer versus I think what a lot of Conmigo did, where they're kind of the two different agents and trying to really be a teacher, not just we'll solve your homework for you, which is what I imagine every student wants.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's interesting because you've seen a lot of different, reactions to this. So the knee-jerk reaction is AI is going to cause cheating. Nobody's going to ever be able to learn. And so you kind of saw this in even New York City public schools. They banned it and then they unbanned it, and now they're working with OpenAI. Pandora's out of the box. I don't think there's going back to a world without this technology. And so I think there's definitely a lot of questions about cheating. I think a lot of higher ed institutions are grappling with that right now. My take is I think we have to actually look at the kind of fundamentals of how we assess and how we teach, because I think as opposed to retrofitting AI into our existing systems of grading and assessing students, I don't think it works, because it's actually very problematic if you do use a lot of the detectors that have been coming out. So there's been a ton of studies that show that some of these AI detectors, which, by the way, OpenAI actually launched their own one and then they canceled it or they unreleased it because it just wasn't accurate enough. But basically, these detectors that tell you whether content is AI generated, time and time again, that those type of detectors end up misidentifying content, especially against like non-native English speakers. And I think false positives, especially in a higher ed setting or even K-12, can be really problematic for students. So yeah, I think I don't know if there's one popular camp about what types of AI study tools are best. I think people are kind of still in that figuring it out mode, but I do think we have seen a little bit more of an openness to embedding AI into the student workflow than before. And I do think the companies that do speak the language of educators will prevail better than I think maybe some of these solver tools that are just saying, hey, give us your photo of your homework and we'll solve it for you. I think companies that are kind of taking an approach of will be a co-pilot, will help you get to an answer, but we won't give you the answer type tools are maybe having better success in actual, school district or teacher sales.
Interesting, right? So those ones probably do really well in the B to school district markets. And then I imagine the I'll give you the homework is probably doing well in the B2C experiences.
Yeah. So there are companies like, for example, Cactus, which launched, I think, late last year, and they're at 2 or 3 million users, students,
right,
all organic growth, have just gone viral, and similar companies. But I don't think you're going to see, or it's going to be, I think it'll be interesting to see how they translate that into a school type product. But I also think there's worlds where these products don't ever try to cross sell to both school and students. I think, for example, like one of Chegg's problems was that they kind of became the enemy of student when there was a policy where they were going to release the names of students who were using Chegg to the universities. And so
they were going to do that?
Yeah. And so I think it is interesting. I think if you are going to build a solver tool, which, at the end of the day, you are actually in many ways, platforms like Wolfram Alpha help you get solutions.
Yeah, of course. I mean, calculators do that. We've had solvers for decades.
Exactly. And so I don't know if there's a fundamental, I don't have a stance on whether those are cheating or right or wrong. But I do think if you're going to build one of those solutions, it's very hard to land customers in both worlds.
Is one of those groups having showing more traction than the other? Are the B2C, are they growing faster than the ones going to schools? Or like I'm seeing pretty heavy adoption from the schools these days, which is like
Yeah.
a new trend.
Yeah. I would say in the consumer front, there's a lot more adoption of like AI first tools that have popped up in the last year or so. I would say in schools, the type of adoption we're seeing is more, I think, a mixed bag of tools that have come across, that have popped up in the last year or so, as well as incumbents that have embedded AI. So I think,
Right.
especially if you're a school facing AI tool, you are very entrenched in this broader like David versus Goliath type fight where you have Power School, GoGuardian just announced that they're launching AI tools,
Yeah.
Instructors building an AI marketplace. These are all the incumbents that have existing distribution to
Yep.
the majority of schools in the US. They also already have a ton of proprietary data on not only the actual students and how they learn and their learning pathways, but also how teachers operate and use their platforms. And so I think that's kind of the interesting dynamic where we're seeing is selling to schools. It'll be interesting to see who prevails in this broader fight. But certainly a lot of companies that are actually entering schools as schools figure the AI strategy out.
Do you think these larger companies will do sort of what Microsoft did to Slack, was just build a copy of popular tools and then offer it in a bundle?
I think we are seeing a little bit of that. So you kind of saw a similar story where you had that company Jasper, as I mentioned, that raised a ton of money. And, they recently made an announcement that they're slashing their projected revenue by 30%, laid off a ton of people. But basically what ended up happening is all of the features that they had are being now absorbed into the broader productivity suite within Google Docs, within Microsoft. So I think we're probably going to see the same dynamic where if you are just a wrapper and you help teachers generate lesson plans, Power School is not only already probably has a team, or Instructure, for example, already has an AI team, but they also already have all of your existing content that you don't need to upload from scratch. They already know what grades you're teaching or how many students you're teaching. They have all this data on you so that your output is much more refined and personalized than, a general wrapper that I go from a completely separate website. So I think that's kind of where there's a lot of advantage. But at the same time, I don't think with every massive generational, tech disruption, I don't think the incumbents will win this all. I do think there's a lot of opportunity for disruption. And I think, as we know, the broader trend around innovators dilemma, I think things will change.
Yeah. They have such all those LMSs, Instructure, T2L, whatever, has such an incredible opportunity to like actually meaningfully change the productivity of a professor and make their life better.
Yeah. 100%.
I'm always just rooting for the professors and teachers, but I'm so interested to see, is it an add-on or is it them themselves? They have such an incredible opportunity in front of them. I really hope someone takes it. Yeah, it should be one click.
Or that they just acquire and help scale the working solution that's out there.
Right? Also like, reasonable. That's how the machine works.
Yeah, we could see that too. Yeah, I think we're still seeing that like play out right now in real time of whether it's kind of a buy versus build type dynamic, but we'll see.
Are there any big gaps that you're seeing? So you talked about some of the areas that just sort of have a glut of people building for that. Are there areas that just seem maybe not so obvious, or they would have those, but are there areas that you're feeling like someone should really step in here and build something that would be amazing and not have all this competition?
We're actually seeing quite a lot of very interesting use cases of AI. I would say there are less companies that are doing sophisticated things around multimodality. And I know everyone's aware that ChatGPT just rolled out multimodality, but I think the ability to bridge different types of models together to create really innovative one-of-a-kind solutions. So companies like Synthesia, they're London-based, but they basically use both natural language processing as well as the language models, as well as synthetic and human computer vision to create these avatars that you can use for L&D videos, marketing videos, you name it. Instead of what would have taken, a 7-person marketing team and a film crew to create a L&D video, you can now input a script, you can choose your avatar, and in 10 minutes create that video, and that video can be translated and spoken in 160 different languages. You can actually even make it so that that video, when they say it's an L&D video that's on Intro to AI, I can say, hi, Sean, hi, Brian. Every single video can be hyper personalized to the end user. So really cool stuff of, I think, combining different types of technologies together. I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff in the gaming and AI space that will come a little downstream into EdTech. I don't think I've seen a ton of solutions right now, but the ability to now, leverage AI to do text to 3D, and the ability to create entire immersive environments with just natural language, I think is really exciting. So I think if you think about the Labsters of the world, there's a really unique opportunity to kind of fundamentally disrupt their existing cost structures and the way they build businesses and build content, because that content, that cost of creation is now zero. So I don't know what those companies will look like, but I do think anything in kind of the 3D or intersection of AR, VR, and AI is really exciting. Anything in gaming where you can now talk to NPCs is really exciting. I don't know what that looks like downstream in education, but hopefully more solutions to come.
What was the company you said that was building where you could build the video out of the avatar and it would talk in all these different languages? What was that one?
Synthesia.
Yeah. I've seen something like that. And I'm curious, are you seeing, are they approaching the point where they actually beat the uncanny valley? That, I don't know if people listening have heard of this, but it's that place where it's fine to sort of watch a cartoon speak, but as soon as it tries to be human but isn't perfectly human, it's really disturbing. And are they getting to the point where that is actually going to work?
Yeah, I think that's a super valid question, and one that I've been even thinking about. We actually tried to use Synthesia for a ton of marketing for the ASU GSV Summit a couple of months ago, and I think it had not really risen above that uncanny valley threshold, because it's a really cool tech, but to actually put it in front of people and say, like, this is a human is a little weird. So I don't think it's gone there yet, but with the pace of just
it's getting closer.
It'll get better and better. Just the amount of video data that they're ingesting. So I know now, right now, the first iteration of this is just a person that sits face on, chats like a newscaster, but they're now collecting so much data on how people move. And so you could imagine a world where you can actually, with natural language, create an entire video and a how-to guide on even how do you use this washing machine, and be able to show actual action and movements, where I think that's not there yet, but I would assume that it can come in the next year or two.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that Will Smith eating spaghetti video. For anybody who hasn't seen that, you can go look that up, and it's awful. So, as soon as they get past that, I can imagine this becoming something really, really useful.
It is interesting because I think on the text and image front, I think we've kind of surpassed that. So it's kind of just thinking through, and even audio.
Video's a lot harder though.
Video's a lot harder, but even audio now. So there's a really cool team out of London as well called 11 Labs. And they are very different from, most people are aware of Whisper, which is OpenAI's kind of text-to-speech or speech-to-text model. But 11 Labs, what they're able to do is even they're able to build in emotion and tone into text. So you can see applications where I'm not only generating text to speech, but I can say, I want the speech to be happy. I want the speech to be angry. And you can see how that actually works much better for not only dubbing and video, but also even reading textbooks or something like an Amira. If for the first time you don't just have a monotonous robot voice, you can have someone actually sound like a real person. You can even use Leonardo DiCaprio's voice or Obama's voice. So the ability to just actually do so much more and make it much more versatile is really exciting. And I'm sure you'll see that in video as well.
I'm going to change topic slightly. For the company that I run, we do AI stuff, and so we get a bunch of questions from universities. And one that keeps coming up a lot is all the privacy stuff. I'm kind of curious how you've seen maybe portfolio companies or just the industry navigate all the IP rules around curriculum. I mean, there's all kinds of layers to this onion. And I'm kind of curious what you've seen.
Yeah, I think obviously initially there was a ton of, scramble to figure out how do we embed AI? And I think this was even before OpenAI or any of these, model providers had enterprise solutions. And so obviously I don't think there was a lot of general education around the usage of these models and how they worked. And so you had people inputting company data, and you can see the same thing in higher ed as well, where kids are maybe inputting personally identifiable information into these models. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of just fear from that. And we kind of saw the effects of that. Even Bard recently had an incident where their Google results would release people's Bard searches, private Bard searches. So yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of concerns around data, especially if you're dealing with in schools and student data. I think the enterprise solutions that we've seen have been interesting, and they have been tackling, selling to schools. And so from the universities that we've spoken with, there's a lot of questions like, do we use Amazon Bedrock? Do we use OpenAI's enterprise solution? I do think, I don't know, I don't have an answer on which is better at this moment. And I think, I'm sure these universities are also navigating it in real time. But I do think, especially if you are building an education solution, and we've seen this from quite a few people who maybe come from deeper tech backgrounds but have not really interfaced with educators, this is something like you really have to get right, because if you end up having a model that, not only that outputs a ton of student data accidentally, that there are potential, massive ramifications. I also think for some of the companies that are selling to publishers, I think they don't realize that, if you're building a great model and you're like fine tuning and you say, oh, I'm, training this model on all this content available, you're also potentially, mixing content. So if I'm potentially selling to both McGraw-Hill and Cambium and I'm ingesting their learning content, all of this sits in a black box. And if I can't tell my end users or these clients that, I got this result from this textbook, I think that traceability is really important. I think tech is getting there, but for now, while it is a black box, I do think anyone who is interfacing with tech has to think through, is this company able to identify the source of where this content came from? Is this company able to identify what type of training data is entering the specific models? I do think those are really important things to be able to at least have an answer for.
It's important to get right.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
Yeah, it's definitely hard. For what it's worth, though, I do think, students and employees are just using it regardless of these restrictions. So it is interesting to, I think, see like what is done, on the admin level in restraining this, but then in action, everybody is just using it anyway. So we'll see.
Which is kind of the argument against bans, or, you mentioned the New York City public schools and their ban, and thankfully they turned that around in about 8 months or so. But there's a reason that those bans aren't going to work, and trying to avoid the whole copyright issue and all of that stuff with AI producing information, you can't avoid it, and we have to adapt to the new reality that we have, and go, and not just go, no, keep the old methods, but use the new tools. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. One of the things that's most interesting to me about this wave of EdTech, of educational technology, is that the schools are seemingly very excited and very willing to adopt it, right? I've seen that in a lot of companies, like almost everybody's got pilots or district contracts. In your latest newsletter, I think you said that there's an article, more than 70% of higher ed administrators have a favorable view of AI. When a company comes to you and they've got a tool, they've got it in the schools and so forth, how are you differentiating the apps that like are truly solving a problem from those where the schools are like, we're just trying out AI and this is the first company we found?
Yeah. I think really important question. I think the big thing, especially in investors' eyes right now, is there's an increased emphasis on actual retention and stickiness of the product as opposed to user growth. So we're seeing a lot of companies that have said in the last couple of months, we've 10x our adoption and we're reaching XYZ amount of millions of users and such. But then you ask them for their retention numbers and it's 5% after month 6. And so I think there's a ton of amplification of numbers and just people adopting and new users because people are there's a ton of novelty effect right now and people are just figuring it out. But I do think it's important for companies to actually build solutions that are embedded within a workflow. So I think just thinking through deeply whether your solution is something that is a really cool gimmick or actually something that is adding value. And so I do think the incumbents in the space have a little bit more of an advantage is the ability to naturally embed AI. So think being able to have a lesson plan generator already sit in my Canvas as opposed to having to go to a completely separate platform and upload things. And so that dynamic, I think companies being able to really show the value add. So I think really being explicit about, hey, I saved you X amount of time, even just on the interface. Because I think a lot of people don't realize, now that AI is so pervasive, they don't realize how much this technology is adding value. And then I also think it's interesting, just because you asked about what kind of AI companies are doing well, I do think it is interesting. We've seen maybe a trend where companies will charge a premium product for an AI version of itself. I don't know if that's working as well as expected, because I think your everyday consumer is not able to quantify how much AI value add there is in their life unless you explicitly tell them you've saved XYZ time or I've created XYZ amount of stuff for you.
One follow-up on that. What would you look for in a good retention number?
I think day 30 retention for ChatGPT right now is about 30 to 40%. So I do think for AI first apps, and actually Sequoia has a really great article on this. So I would recommend people checking that out because they actually have the exact numbers. But anything, there's another company called Lenza, which has even lower at 25% after month one. I think people are aware that the benchmark is a lot lower. But I will say, at least for ChatGPT, the number might not be as accurate because their tech or OpenAI's models are so pervasive that number is going down because people are actually using ChatGPT wrapped around other products. So,
Right.
Or on their phone or just on web. So I don't know if that's necessarily the most accurate number, but I would say there's definitely lower standards among the VC world of what is a sticky product. But I also think ultimately, especially as we know in this funding environment, like a good product is a good product, whether or not you have AI. And I think people will ultimately end up holding high standards of how sticky something is and ultimately look at willingness to pay. So you could have a really cool feature, but is this something that people are willing to dish out money? Is this, especially in an AI age, like, is what you've built a fun little vitamin, or is it really a painkiller that if I don't, as an enterprise or as a school or as a consumer, dish out money for, is this going to ruin my life? So I think making sure that what you're building really leans the latter as opposed to just like a fun gimmick.
Makes sense. So another place that I'm interested in is the corporate L&D space, right?
Oh, yes.
Are you predicting that we're going to see like an even stronger version of what you think is going to happen in the school space, where the incumbents have the advantage of distribution already and probably already like sales contracts, and they're just going to roll these things out? Or do you think the little guy actually has a shot here?
Yeah, I think in kind of the existing categories as we know it, the incumbents do have a really strong advantage. So not only on everything I mentioned around just existing data and proprietary data and distribution, but also in that they've already built trust with these partners. Yep. And so I think that's a really big thing, especially in enterprise. I don't have a reason to sign a massive long-term contract with a team that's built up of 2 to 3 people, right? When I can already use degrees, like maybe not as great, but similar product that's already in the platform.
Already paid for.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think they have that going for them, for the incumbents. But I also think there are completely new categories being built. So as I mentioned, there's a ton of like interesting companies building in that kind of knowledge search or second brain type platforms. So there's a company called Glean or even Sana Labs. They're basically kind of doing away with the fact that all of an enterprise's knowledge sits in all these silos, whether it's Slack or an email, especially when someone leaves, a lot of tribal knowledge is lost. So I think basically using LLMs, which are very good at taking unstructured data and synthesizing that. And so if I'm a new employee onboarding, I can easily just search for things and have kind of an internalized Google. So I think those are new categories that historically we haven't seen that many companies build for that.
I'm so happy about things like Glean solving the world of terrible Atlassian wikis. I think that was like the first thing I built as a weekend project when I like started playing with this, because it was just like, God, it's such a terrible current solution.
Yeah. Yeah. But I do think it is interesting, kind of back to like, is your solution vitamin or painkiller? Right now, I don't know if some of those kind of enterprise search solutions have crossed that threshold because I don't know. Well, I don't have numbers on what retention looks like among employees, but we'll see. That's kind of another question we have.
The whole note-taking, second brain, categorizing my information space, I'd love to see Readwise start building a bot for me and able to interact with all of my past book notes and things like that. But it seems like maybe it's a smaller market, so it just lags behind everything else. I think Tana is like the only one that I've seen like really try to integrate the AI at this point.
There's one called Mem.
Mems.
It says an M.
Mem, yeah.
Can't remember. Mem, yeah.
They're actually OpenAI backed, and that's kind of like a personal search. So I do think those are interesting. There's a couple other ones. There's actually a really interesting one I even just met in New York Tech Week yesterday that basically synthesizes all the information that sits on your phone screenshots and notes and just built it. And
smart.
Yeah, and I think it's such a simple use case. And I think with a lot of productivity, that it's tough because Google and Microsoft are going to expand into those worlds very naturally. And so I think even just looking at, they have this, Google has a project called Project Tailwind, and it's Notebook LM. So basically, they're now able to create an internal version of Evernote or Notion, but all of it plugs into your Google Drive content. And so say I have a ton of notes for my class. I don't know how to summarize all of those 20 classes of notes into one concise worksheet. Notebook LM can do that because it already has access to all of your notes. And so I think especially anything in the productivity space where you're selling to consumers, your fight is not with other startups, it's with Google. and they have access to your email. And so, yeah.
It's a scary fight. It's much more fun to frame your fight not with Google.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here listening to this and just thinking, first of all, we're going to have just a list of all of these things that have been mentioned in this podcast because it's
There's a lot of cool ones. Yeah.
I'm really happy Sean does the show notes.
How does someone who doesn't work at GSV, doesn't have this Substack, how do they find out about this stuff? Obviously, reading your Substack would be a great start, but where does someone want to go? Like, there's a site that I found called There's an AI for That, for instance. Are there other resources for people to go and, rather than trying to sort of glean, using one of the terms we've used, but rather than trying to sort of absorb all of this information coming at them all the time about all these new things, where they could just go out and say, hey, I need this thing. Is there an AI that does this? Or is there a new company that's building this? Where would someone go for that information?
Yeah, I think it's tough because right now, I think there's an AI is a good start. AI for That is a good start. I wouldn't say there's a ton of like venture-backed companies there. Those are, I think, a lot of self-listed, kind of like Product Hunt, but just for AI. I would definitely keep up with the kind of investor activity to kind of have good signals who is actually developing traction. So following a lot of the funds that do have heavy AI investments, even internally, we track a lot of what Gradient Ventures, which is Google's AI fund, or OpenAI Ventures is doing, because it gives kind of a good signal of what's to come. I also think, especially if you're building in the education space, the traditional trend we've seen is like the first wave of applications, even just regionally, if you look at new markets being developed, the first wave of applications are always in fintech, in EdTech, and traditional enterprise SaaS. But the second wave is kind of what you see in EdTech. And so there's a lot that we can learn from what's happening in the markets that are getting a ton of funding right now. And kind of what I was saying, just even like the applications in gaming and AI that are being funded, how can we apply those to EdTech? I think there's a massive opportunity there. I also think just actually talking to teachers about who's trying to sell to them.
Thought.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's been interesting. We have a very close relationship with over 800 plus district leaders and 300 plus higher ed leaders through the summit. And we just kind of continually keep in touch with them, and they'll send us stuff like, hey, have you seen this? They're trying to sell us this product. And that's just a really good way for, at least if you have a good pulse and relationship with this district leaders, you kind of have a better sense of what they're looking for as well. So I think that's a very good way for anyone who's building to just make sure that what you're building is not just like completely unhinged and something that teachers or schools won't pay for.
It's always a good reminder. Talk to teachers, use your network, talk to school district leaders. I think it's always frustrating because teachers, right, aren't paying for the software. It's the school districts.
Exactly. So that's another thing, especially if you're K-12 facing, is like your payer is not the same as the end user. And the end user could be everyone from the parent to the teacher to the student to the actual admin. So how do you build a product that delivers that like clear value prop, especially in an AI age, is really important.
Yeah.
All right, so final question, because we're running up on time here. You've got ins with all sorts of people. You're seeing all sorts of things. Are you able to tell us something that's coming in AI and education that we may not have even heard about yet? Where are the trends going? What's the future holds, say, 6 months, a year down the road, where we're going to just have our minds blown? What's that thing that's coming that you know about that we don't?
I don't know if I mean, it'll be funny to check back on this podcast in a couple months and see if,
see if you're right.
Yeah, I think two things I'm really excited about and would love to see applications in. And I guess to backtrack, I think what we've seen a lot of right now has been very much so like either embedding AI to automate monotonous work or content generation. Yeah. So I think those are kind of the two big camps. But I also think there's a lot of really cool stuff coming in two buckets. One, I think the ability to now, maybe it's a massive oversimplification, but like the ability to clone yourself. So an AI model for every single person. And so you can see how that applies, for example, in an education setting where your best teachers or your best professors can only really teach 200 kids at a time. They can't keep track of all of them. And so how do you have an AI that has ingested all of their knowledge, all of their teaching style, their voice even, and create these personal LMs that other people can engage with? So I think really exciting stuff. And I think that'll also extend potentially into AI agents. So actual AIs completing work for us as opposed to, or completing work on behalf of us and having our approval to complete it. But I think as opposed to a human having to prompt every single action, the ability for AIs to complete entire workflows without us and us supervising. So I think that's one camp. And then I think one piece is, especially with multimodal, I think historically anything hardware has been really tough, but I do think there are really exciting opportunities at that intersection. I don't know if they're venture businesses, but I do think the ability to now have your objects be able to see for the first time, and I don't know what applications will come out of that, but the ability to talk to objects and have them be able to interpret the world the way that you interpret the world, I think will unlock massive applications, even in a school setting, as it relates to being able to actually bridge online and physical learning, which historically have been very separate learning modalities. So yeah, that's probably high level the two things I'm excited. And hopefully someone, if any of you listening or building solutions, would love to chat.
I'm excited to talk to the Claire clone in 6 months to hear about the update on the AI industry.
We may already be talking to the Claire.
She's ahead of us.
No, it's wild. I actually emailed someone, a founder, and their clone had emailed me back, and it was like fully coherent.
Nice.
And it was like trained on how their entire language and tone.
Right. You guys are going to be interacting with my clone now from now on. That's all I know. This is my next step.
It brings up so many questions of ethics and just what is it to be you, and if you can have something that ingests all of your information and can act like you.
Are we going to be okay
with that? Yeah. It's so interesting. That may be our next episode with you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Claire, this was fantastic. Just incredible information. I think people are going to just, from the episode notes alone, are going to learn a ton. That this was just a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your energy and your interest in this with us. It was really cool to learn about this from you.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the platform to chat with you all. I've personally loved riffing and learned a ton from this conversation too. So
fantastic. All right. Well, folks, thank you for listening. That's all for now. And always keep learning. Did you learn something just now? Get the full episode of Ways We Learn wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, we'd love to get your rating or review.